The courtroom was alive with whispers and murmuring voices as the day's proceedings began. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with curiosity, others glancing at their watches, eager for the trial to move along. At the center of it all stood a woman who had everyone's attention. She was sharp, confident, and carried herself like someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. As she took the witness stand, the room fell silent, every eye on her. The lawyer asked her to recount what happened during that fateful night, when a routine traffic stop turned into chaos. The woman didn't hesitate. Her words came out clear and steady, painting a vivid picture of the events. She described how the officer approached her car, his tone escalating quickly from calm instructions to aggressive commands. According to her, he acted like he was untouchable, someone above the law. Then came the moment that made the entire courtroom pause. When asked about the officer's behavior, she let out a short laugh, shaking her head. He strutted around, like he owned the place, she said, rolling her eyes slightly. But honestly, he's just a nobody, a small-time cop trying to throw his weight around. Her voice dripped with disdain, and while some people in the room nodded sympathetically, others exchanged glances. No one noticed the man sitting quietly in the back row. His face remained neutral, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To everyone else, he was just another face in the crowd, dressed in plain clothes, blending into the background. But, inside, he felt the sting of her words. This man wasn't just any observer. He held a position few knew about. Head of Internal Affairs, the division responsible for investigating officers accused of misconduct. For years, he'd worked behind the scenes ensuring accountability within the force, yet here he sat, labeled a nobody by the very person whose testimony could shape the outcome of this case. As the woman continued speaking, laying into the accused officer with biting remarks, the man listened intently. He couldn't help but wonder if her version of events matched reality. Sure, the officer had a reputation for being hot-headed, but something about her story didn't sit right with him. There were moments where her confidence wavered ever so slightly, hints of exaggeration creeping into her narrative. Still, no one questioned her. After all, why would they doubt someone so sure of themselves? When the session ended, the man lingered, in his seat for a moment, watching as the courtroom emptied. The woman walked past him without a second glance, completely unaware of who he really was. If she had known, would she have chosen her words more carefully? Probably not, he thought with a faint smile. People often spoke recklessly when they believed no one important was listening. Back in his office later that day, the man found himself replaying the scene in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had dismissed him or underestimated his role. In fact, it happened more often than he cared to admit. But there was something different about this situation. Maybe it was the way she delivered her testimony with such certainty, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that her story wasn't entirely truthful. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him. He pulled up the case file on his desk, flipping through pages filled with notes, photos, and witness statements. The incident itself seemed straightforward enough. A traffic stop gone wrong, accusations of excessive force, and now a lawsuit threatening to tarnish the department's already fragile reputation. But the deeper he dove into the details, the more inconsistencies he noticed. Small things at first, a timeline that didn't quite align, minor discrepancies between accounts, but enough to raise questions. What struck him most, though, was the woman's attitude. She hadn't just been angry, she'd been fueled by something personal. Revenge? A grudge? Or perhaps something bigger than either of them realized? The man leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just about one officer anymore. Something larger was at play, and he was determined to find out what it was. For now, the woman remained oblivious to his true identity. To her, he was just another faceless spectator in a sea of faces. Little did she know, her words had ignited a spark in him, a drive to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. And as he closed the file and prepared to leave for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case would change everything, for better or worse. The man sat at his desk, the faint hum of the overhead lights filling the silence. The office was quiet now, most people having gone home for the day. Papers were scattered across his workspace, case files, handwritten notes, and printed photos. He stared at the woman's testimony again, reading between the lines, searching for something he might have missed. Her words echoed in his mind. He's just a nobody. At first glance, her story seemed solid. She described the officer as arrogant, aggressive, and out of control. Witnesses corroborated parts of her account, confirming that the traffic stop had escalated into a heated confrontation. But there were cracks in her narrative, tiny fractures that hinted at something more beneath the surface. For instance, she claimed the officer shouted at her from the moment he approached her car. Yet one witness reported hearing only calm instructions at the start. Another said the tension began when the woman refused to hand over her license. These contradictions gnawed at him. As head of internal affairs, he'd seen countless cases where emotions ran high, clouding judgment and distorting facts. People often remembered events differently depending on their perspective or their intentions. Was this woman exaggerating certain details to make her case stronger? Or was she deliberately twisting the truth for reasons of her own? Determined to get answers, the man decided to dig deeper. He started by looking into the woman's background, hoping to piece together a clearer picture of who she was beyond the confident persona she displayed in court. What he uncovered surprised him. On paper, she appeared ordinary enough, a marketing professional with a stable job and no criminal record. She lived in a modest apartment, drove a reliable car, and kept to herself for the most part. To anyone else, she might have seemed like your average citizen caught up in an unfortunate situation. But the more he investigated, the more layers he uncovered. A closer look at her recent history revealed financial struggles she hadn't mentioned. There were disputes with her landlord over late rent payments, emails exchanged with her employer about falsified expense reports, and even hints of mounting debt. None of this directly tied her to the case, but it painted a different image of her life, one marked by stress and instability. Then came the discovery that truly caught his attention. Through social media posts and public records, he found evidence linking her to a local activist group known for staging protests against law enforcement. Their rhetoric ranged from calling for reform to outright condemning police officers as corrupt. While there was nothing illegal about joining such a group, it raised questions about her motivations. Had she exaggerated her story, not just to seek justice but also to fuel the group's anti-police agenda? The man leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It wasn't uncommon for people to use incidents like this to push broader agendas. Still, he hesitated to jump to conclusions. Maybe her involvement with the group was coincidental. Maybe her financial troubles were unrelated to the case. Without concrete proof, all he had were suspicions, and suspicions weren't enough to accuse someone of lying under oath. Still, something about her demeanor lingered in his mind. Her confidence in court had been striking, almost rehearsed. And those moments when her voice faltered ever so slightly, it was as if she were carefully choosing her words, crafting a version of events designed to sway the jury. He needed more than circumstantial evidence. He needed hard facts. That evening, instead of heading straight home, the man decided to follow her. He told himself it was part of the investigation, a necessary step to uncover the truth. But deep down, he knew, curiosity played a role too. Who was this woman really? What drove her to take such a bold stance against the officer? And why did she seem so determined to paint him as a villain? Parking his car a few blocks away from her apartment building, he watched as she left for the night. She walked briskly, her coat pulled tight against the chilly air. The streets were dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the pavement. She didn't appear to notice him trailing behind, keeping a safe distance. After a while, she entered a small cafe tucked away on a side street. Through the window, he saw her sit down at a table near the corner. Moments later, a man joined her. They spoke in hushed tones, leaning close to each other. From where he stood, the man couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language suggested urgency. At one point, the man slid an envelope across the table. The woman glanced around nervously before tucking it into her bag. His pulse quickened. Whatever was happening here went beyond a simple traffic stop. This wasn't just about exposing misconduct. It was personal. Someone had given her money, likely in exchange for her cooperation. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the full picture remained elusive. As he drove home that night, his thoughts raced. The woman's testimony had seemed convincing at first, but now doubts swirled in his mind. Was she acting alone? Or was she part of something bigger? If she was being used, who was pulling the strings? And what did they stand to gain by targeting the officer? The next morning, he arrived at work early, determined to connect the dots. He reviewed surveillance footage, cross-referenced phone records, and scoured online forums associated with the activist group. Each new clue brought him closer to understanding the truth, but it also complicated matters further. The conspiracy stretched wider than he initially suspected, involving not just individuals but systems and power dynamics. By the end of the week, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Sleep eluded him, replaced by restless nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying scenarios in his head. He knew he couldn't let this go. Justice demanded answers, and it was his duty to find them. But the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Every step forward revealed new obstacles, forcing him to question not only the people involved but also his own assumptions. And yet, despite the challenges, he felt a flicker of resolve. Uncovering the truth wasn't just about vindicating the accused officer or holding the woman accountable. It was about restoring faith in a system that desperately needed it. For every accusation leveled against law enforcement, there were honest officers working tirelessly to protect their communities. If corruption existed within the ranks, it had to be rooted out. If lies threatened to undermine trust, they had to be exposed. With renewed determination, the man prepared to confront the woman. He didn't know how she would react or what secrets she might reveal. All he knew was that the truth mattered, and he wouldn't rest until he found it. The man knew he couldn't delay any longer. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered across his desk, documents, photos, and notes that hinted at a much larger web than he had initially imagined. But there was only so much he could uncover from behind his desk. It was time to step out of the shadows and confront her directly. He didn't relish the idea of confrontation. It wasn't in his nature. But this wasn't about personal feelings anymore. This was about finding the truth. He spent the next morning preparing for the meeting. He reviewed every detail of her testimony, cross-referenced it with the evidence he'd gathered, and mapped out how he would approach her. He wanted to be careful, not accusatory or aggressive. If she felt cornered, she might shut down completely. And if she did, he risked losing the chance to understand what was really going on. By late afternoon, he found himself standing outside her apartment building. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. He hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The lobby was quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He pressed the button for her floor and waited as the elevator climbed slowly upward. When he knocked on her door, she opened it cautiously, peering through the narrow gap. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. She clutched the edge of the door tightly, as if ready to slam it shut at any moment. "I think you know why I'm here," he said calmly, keeping his tone neutral. "We need to talk." She frowned, clearly uneasy. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm not interested." She started to close the door, but he placed a hand against it gently, stopping her. "You already know me," he replied, his voice steady. "You just don't realize it yet." Her brow furrowed as she studied him more closely. Recognition flickered in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. "Wait. You're the guy from the courtroom," she said finally, her voice dropping. "What do you want?" "I'm with Internal Affairs," he explained, pulling out his badge and holding it up briefly. "And I've been looking into your testimony." For a split second, panic flashed across her face. Then she masked it with defiance. "My testimony? What's there to investigate?" "I told the truth." "Did you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Because the more I dig, the more inconsistencies I find. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to project confidence, but her hands trembled, slightly. Look, I don't know what you're talking about. You can't intimidate me. I'm not here to intimidate you, he said firmly. I'm here because something doesn't add up, and I think you know more than you're letting on. She hesitated, glancing back into her apartment as if weighing her options. Finally, she sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. The space was small but tidy, with books stacked neatly on shelves and a worn couch pushed against one wall. She motioned for him to sit, then perched herself on the edge of a chair, visibly tense. All right, she said, her voice clipped. What do you want to know? He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. Let's start with the envelope. Who gave it to you? And why? Her eyes widened and she froze. How do you know about that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I followed you, he admitted without hesitation. I saw you meet with someone at the cafe. They handed you an envelope filled with cash. Care to explain? She looked away, chewing her lip nervously. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then slowly she let out a shaky breath. It's not what you think, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't ask for this. They approached me. Who's they? He pressed, watching her closely. She hesitated again, then shook her head. A group. A local activist organization. They said they could help me expose what happened that night. The officers' behavior, the injustice. They promised me support, resources. But it came with strings attached. He finished for her. She nodded reluctantly. They wanted me to testify against him, to make sure he got punished. They said it was bigger than just me, that it was about holding the police accountable. And the money? He asked gently. They offered it as compensation, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They said it was for my trouble for speaking out. But I swear, I didn't lie under oath. Everything I said in court actually happened. He studied her carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Her body language suggested she was telling the truth, at least part of it. Still, there was more to uncover. Why did they target you specifically? He asked. Out of all the people who've had run-ins with law enforcement, why focus on your case? She looked down at her hands, twisting them anxiously. I don't know, she murmured. Maybe because I fit their narrative, or maybe because they knew about my situation. Your situation? He prompted. My finances, she confessed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I've been struggling lately, rent issues, problems at work. They must have seen that as a weakness, an opportunity. The man nodded thoughtfully. It made sense. People under pressure were easier to manipulate, especially when promises of money and support were dangled in front of them. But this wasn't just about her. The group she mentioned wasn't operating alone. They were part of something bigger, something systemic. What else did they tell you? He asked. Did they mention anything about other cases? Other officers? She shook her head. Not directly, but they talked a lot about corruption within the department, about how certain officers abuse their power and get away with it. They said they were gathering evidence, building a case to take down the entire system. He sat back, processing her words. This wasn't just a rogue activist group stirring up trouble. It was a calculated effort to exploit public distrust of law enforcement. And they were using people like her as pawns in their game. Do you realize what you've gotten yourself into? He asked quietly. This isn't just about one officer anymore. You're part of something much larger and potentially dangerous. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I just wanted justice, for that night, for everything. He softened slightly, seeing the fear and regret etched on her face. I believe you, he said. But you need to understand the gravity of the situation. If we're going to fix this, you'll have to cooperate fully. No more lies, no more half-truths. She nodded, her expression resolute despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Okay, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes. As he left her apartment that evening, the weight of the case settled heavily on his shoulders. He had expected answers, but what he got was a glimpse into a tangled web of manipulation and deceit. The woman wasn't innocent, far from it, but she was also a victim, caught in a game she didn't fully understand. Now, it was up to him to untangle the mess. Every lead he followed seemed to open another door, revealing new players and motives. The conspiracy stretched wider than he had imagined, implicating not just rogue activists, but also individuals within the police department itself. Someone, somewhere was orchestrating this chaos, and he was determined to find out who. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust would be hard to earn, alliances fragile. But one thing was clear. The truth mattered more than ever, and he wouldn't stop until he uncovered every last piece of it. The man left the woman's apartment that evening with a heavy heart but a clearer sense of direction. Her confession had been raw and unfiltered, a mix of fear, regret, and desperation. She wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She was also a person grappling with her own mistakes. But while he felt sympathy for her situation, he knew there was no time to dwell on emotions. The clock was ticking, and every moment wasted meant more opportunities for those pulling the strings to cover their tracks. Back at his office, he spread out the evidence across his desk once again. The case files, surveillance photos, and handwritten notes now seemed like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle slowly coming together. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay objective, to separate emotion from logic when investigating cases. Yet this one felt different. It wasn't just about exposing corruption or holding individuals accountable. It was about unraveling a system designed to exploit distrust and manipulate public perception. With the woman's cooperation secured, he decided to dig deeper into the activist group she had mentioned. At first glance, they appeared to be a grassroots movement advocating for police reform. Their social media pages were filled with passionate posts calling for accountability and justice. Petitions circulated online, urging people to speak out against alleged misconduct by law enforcement. To an outsider, it might have seemed noble, even necessary. But the man knew better. Beneath the surface, something darker lurked. He started by analyzing their funding sources. Activist groups often relied on donations from supporters, but this particular organization seemed unusually well-funded. Large sums of money flowed into their accounts regularly, far exceeding what a typical local campaign would generate. Tracing. The origins of these funds led him down a rabbit hole of shell companies and anonymous donors. Whoever was bankrolling them didn't want to be identified. Next, he turned his attention to their leadership. Publicly, they portrayed themselves as ordinary citizens driven by a desire for change. Privately, however, whispers hinted at connections to influential figures within the city's political landscape. Some members reportedly attended closed-door meetings with policymakers and lobbyists. Others had ties to media outlets known for sensationalizing stories involving law enforcement. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't just about activism, it was about power. As he pieced together the information, a chilling realization dawned on him. The activist group wasn't working alone. They were part of a broader network that included corrupt officials within the police department itself. These insiders fed them selective information, details about officers with questionable records, internal complaints, and disciplinary actions to fuel their narrative. In return, the group provided cover for their schemes, creating distractions and shifting blame onto unsuspecting targets. The man leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Who stood to gain from all this? What was the ultimate goal? Was it simply about discrediting law enforcement? Or was there something bigger at play? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Determined to find answers, he reached out to a trusted colleague, a seasoned investigator who specialized in white-collar crimes. Together, they reviewed the evidence, bouncing ideas off each other late into the night. "It's a classic divide-and-conquer strategy," his colleague remarked after hours of discussion. "They're exploiting existing tensions between the community and the police to further their own agenda." "But whose agenda is it?" the man asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Who benefits from tearing the department apart? His colleague hesitated before responding. That's the million-dollar question. My guess? Someone high up. Someone who wants to control the narrative, and maybe even reshape the entire system to suit their interests. The next morning, the man met with the woman again. This time, she seemed less defensive and more willing to share what she knew. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice softer than before. About how I'm part of something bigger. And I think I remember something important. What is it? He asked, leaning forward slightly. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. The man who gave me the envelope, the one at the cafe, he mentioned someone, a name. He said everything funnels through him. Do you remember the name? The man pressed, his pulse quickening. She nodded. Yeah, it was Richardson. The man froze. Richardson. The name sent a chill down his spine. He knew exactly who it referred to. A prominent city council member with close ties to both law, enforcement, and corporate interests. For years, rumors had swirled about Richardson's involvement in shady dealings, but nothing had ever stuck. Could this be the mastermind behind the conspiracy? Over the next few days, the man focused all his energy on gathering evidence against Richardson. He subpoenaed financial records, tracked phone calls, and interviewed former associates. Each new clue painted a damning picture. Richardson wasn't just pulling strings from the sidelines. He was orchestrating the entire operation. Through intermediaries, he funneled money to the activist group, ensuring they stayed vocal and visible. Meanwhile, he used his influence to protect certain officers while targeting others for public scrutiny. It was a calculated balancing act, designed to maintain control over the department and its image. But proving Richardson's involvement wouldn't be easy. He was careful, meticulous even, leaving almost no trace of direct involvement. The man knew he'd need irrefutable proof if he hoped to bring him down. That's when he remembered something the woman had said during their first meeting. They're gathering evidence, building a case. If the activist group truly believed they were collecting dirt on corrupt officers, then they must have amassed a trove of documents, recordings, and other materials. Perhaps among those files lay the smoking gun he needed. With the woman's reluctant help, he arranged a meeting with one of the group's leaders under the guise of offering insider information. During the exchange, he managed to plant a bug in their office, giving him access to their private communications. What he uncovered surpassed his wildest expectations. Hidden within encrypted messages and locked folders were detailed dossiers on dozens of officers, including Richardson's cronies. There were emails outlining plans to discredit specific individuals, transcripts of secret meetings, and even audio recordings implicating Richardson himself. It was everything he needed to expose the truth. Armed with the evidence, the man faced a moral dilemma. Exposing Richardson would mean dragging countless others into the spotlight. Officers, activists, politicians, all guilty of playing a role in the conspiracy. Careers would be ruined, reputations shattered. On the other hand, staying silent would allow the corruption to fester unchecked, eroding trust in law enforcement even further. After much deliberation, he made his decision. Justice demanded transparency, no matter the cost. He presented his findings to the district attorney, laying out the full scope of the conspiracy. The DA listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When the man finished, she sat in silence for a long moment before nodding. "This changes everything," she said finally. "We'll take it from here." In the weeks that followed, headlines exploded with news of the scandal. Arrests were made, investigations launched, and reforms proposed. The activist group disbanded amid public outrage, their true motives laid bare. Richardson resigned in disgrace, his reputation in tatters. As for the woman, she struck a plea deal in exchange for her testimony, avoiding jail time but facing lifelong consequences for her actions. Through it all, the man remained quiet, watching from the sidelines as the storm unfolded. He hadn't sought recognition or praise. His only goal had been to restore integrity to a broken system. And though the road ahead promised challenges, he found solace in knowing that he had done his part to shine a light in the darkness. The scandal dominated the headlines for weeks, turning into a story that no one could ignore. Every newspaper, news channel, and social media platform buzzed with updates about the conspiracy that had shaken the city to its core. People gathered around water coolers at work, debated over dinner tables, and argued in online comment sections. For the first time in years, there was a sense of collective outrage, not just against the individuals involved, but against the system that had allowed such corruption to fester unchecked. The man who had uncovered the truth watched it all unfold from a distance. He wasn't one for the spotlight, and he preferred it that way. His role in exposing the conspiracy remained largely unknown to the public. To most people, he was just another faceless figure working behind the scenes, a cog in the machine trying to keep things running smoothly. But inside, he felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a lingering sadness. Relief because the truth was finally out. The weight of carrying such a massive secret for so long had taken its toll on him. Sleepless nights, endless hours poring over documents, and the constant fear of being discovered. It all added up. Now that the evidence was in the hands of the authorities, he could breathe a little easier. Justice would take its course, however messy or imperfect it might be. Satisfaction came from knowing that his efforts hadn't been in vain. The arrests, resignations, and investigations signaled a turning point. It wasn't just about punishing those responsible. It was about sending a message. A message that no one, no matter how powerful or influential, was above accountability. Even Richardson, the once untouchable city council member, had fallen from grace. Seeing him step down, humbled and disgraced, was proof that even the highest echelons of power weren't immune to scrutiny. But beneath the relief and satisfaction lay a deep sadness. The case had revealed ugly truths, not only about those implicated, but also about society itself. The activist group, for instance, had started with noble intentions, to hold law enforcement accountable and push for reform. Somewhere along the way, though, their ideals had been twisted, manipulated by those seeking personal gain. They became pawns in a game they didn't fully understand, trading integrity for influence. And then there was the woman, whose desperation had made her vulnerable to exploitation. She hadn't set out to deceive anyone, yet she ended up playing a key role in a dangerous scheme. Her life would never be the same. The man often thought about her during quiet moments. After everything she'd done, she deserved consequences. But he couldn't help feeling sorry for her. She was a product of circumstances, financial struggles, mounting pressures, and opportunists who saw her as an easy target. In court, she struck a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Richardson and others in exchange for leniency. While she avoided jail time, the damage to her reputation was irreversible. Friends distanced themselves, her employer fired her, and strangers judged her harshly based on snippets of news articles. One evening, as he walked home from work, he spotted her sitting alone on a park bench. At first, he hesitated, unsure whether to approach her, but something compelled him to stop. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly, standing a few feet away. She looked up, startled. When she recognized him, her expression softened slightly. "Go ahead," she said, gesturing toward the empty space beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The park was quiet, save for the rustling leaves and distant chirping of birds. Finally, she broke the silence. "I guess I should thank you," she murmured, staring straight ahead. "You could have destroyed me completely. Instead, you gave me a chance." He nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Justice isn't about revenge," he replied. "It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. You made mistakes, yes, but you also helped bring down something much bigger than yourself." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Doesn't make it any easier, though. My life is ruined. Everyone looks at me like I'm some kind of monster." "You're not a monster," he said firmly. "You're human. Humans make bad decisions sometimes. What matters is what you do next." She glanced at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "And what am I supposed to do now? Start over? Pretend none of this ever happened? No one expects you to forget, he said gently. But maybe you can use this experience to grow, to learn. Maybe someday you'll find a way to make things right. Not just for yourself, but for others too. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which were clasped tightly together. That sounds nice, she admitted quietly. But it's easier said than done. I know, he said with a faint smile. But nothing worth doing ever comes easy. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the park. For the first time in months, she seemed at peace, or at least less burdened. As they parted ways, she offered him a small nod of gratitude. It wasn't much, but it meant something. Back at his office the following week, the man reflected on the whirlwind of events. The department had implemented sweeping reforms in response to the scandal, aiming to rebuild trust with the community. Officers attended mandatory ethics training sessions, internal investigations became more transparent, and oversight committees were formed to ensure accountability. Progress was slow, and skepticism lingered, but it was a start. Still, the man knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption thrived in secrecy, and rooting it out required constant vigilance. There would always be new challenges, new threats to the integrity of the system. But he refused to let cynicism creep in. If anything, the case had reinforced his belief in the importance of his work. Every small victory mattered. Every act of honesty, every effort to expose wrongdoing, it all contributed to a larger purpose. Late one night, as he packed up his things to leave, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a colleague who had assisted him during the investigation. Just heard the DA's office is filing additional charges against Richardson. Thought you'd want to know. The man smiled faintly as he read the message. Another step forward. Another reminder that justice, though imperfect, was still possible. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. Outside, the city stretched before him, alive with lights and sounds. It was far from perfect, but it was home, and worth fighting for. As he walked through the streets, he thought about the lessons he'd learned, about the fragility of trust, the complexity of human nature, and the resilience required to seek the truth. He didn't have all the answers, nor did he expect to. But one thing was certain: the journey mattered as much as the destination. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, hope would endure. Months had passed since the scandal broke, and life in the city began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shockwaves had subsided, replaced by a cautious sense of optimism. People talked less about the conspiracy now, but its impact lingered, in subtle ways. Conversations about accountability, reform, and trust became part of everyday discussions. For the first time in years, there was hope that real change might be possible. The man who had uncovered the truth found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. It wasn't just the case itself that stayed with him. It was the people, the choices they made, and the ripple effects those choices created. He thought often about the woman who had played such a pivotal role in exposing the conspiracy. Her testimony had been instrumental, but it came at a cost. She carried the weight of her actions every day, navigating a world that viewed her with suspicion. One afternoon, as he walked through the bustling streets near his office, he spotted her again. This time, she was sitting at an outdoor cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book. She looked different, calmer, more composed. There was still a hint of sadness in her eyes, but it was tempered by something else: determination. When their eyes met, she smiled faintly and gestured for him to join her. "Fancy seeing you here," she said as he pulled out a chair. Her voice was lighter than he remembered, almost cheerful. "I could say the same," he replied, returning her smile. "How have you been?" She shrugged, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Better, I guess. Not great, but better. I started volunteering at a community center downtown. It's not much, but it feels good to do something positive for a change." "That's good to hear," he said sincerely. You deserve a fresh start. She nodded, looking down at her hands. It's funny, isn't it? A few months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I realize it's just beginning, in a way. I don't know what the future holds, but at least I'm trying to make amends. Her words struck a chord with him. Redemption wasn't easy, especially when the stakes were so high. But she was taking steps forward, however small, and that mattered. It reminded him why he did what he did, not just to expose wrongdoing, but to give people a chance to rebuild, to grow, to become better versions of themselves. As they chatted, the conversation shifted to broader topics: the state of the police department, public perception, and the ongoing efforts to restore trust. Things are changing, she said thoughtfully. I mean, slowly, but they're changing. People are starting to see that not everyone in law enforcement is bad, that some officers genuinely care about doing the right thing. He nodded in agreement. It's a two-way street. We have to earn their trust, and they have to be willing to give it. It won't happen overnight, but it's a start. They parted ways after a while, each heading in opposite directions. As he walked back to his office, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would still be challenging. There would always be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But progress was happening, and sometimes that was enough. Later that evening, the man sat alone in his apartment, staring out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, casting a warm glow over the urban landscape. He thought about all the lives touched by the scandal, the officers who had lost their jobs, the activists whose reputations were tarnished, the politicians who had fallen from grace. Each person had their own story, their own struggles and triumphs. But amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. The reforms implemented within the department were beginning to take root. Officers participated in workshops focused on ethics and community engagement, learning how to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. Oversight committees worked tirelessly to ensure transparency, holding everyone accountable, from rookies to veterans. Slowly but surely, trust was being rebuilt. For the man, the experience had changed him in profound ways. He had entered the Yahuar investigation driven by duty, determined to uncover the truth, no longer matter the cost. But along the way, he had discovered something unexpected: humanity. Behind every lie, every manipulation, every act of corruption, there were people. Flawed, complex, and capable of both harm and healing. Understanding that duality had deepened his perspective, making him more empathetic without compromising his commitment to justice. As he reflected on the journey, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the headlines or the arrests. It was in the quieter victories. In the officer who chose to report misconduct instead of turning a blind eye. In the activist who redirected their passion toward constructive change rather than destruction. In the woman who had once been exploited but was now working to make a difference in her community. And then there was him, the man who had spent years operating in the shadows, ensuring accountability without seeking recognition. He hadn't set out to be a hero, nor did he consider himself one. But in standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, he had proven that integrity mattered. That courage, no matter how small, could spark meaningful change. The next morning, he arrived at work early as usual. His desk was cluttered with files, reminders of cases yet to be solved and challenges yet to be faced. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt a quiet resolve. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next. As he settled into his chair, he glanced at a framed quote hanging on the wall, a gift from a colleague years ago. It read, "Justice is not about perfection, it's about persistence." He smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. They were a reminder of why he did what he did, and why he would continue to do it. Because justice wasn't just a destination, it was a journey. And as long as there were people willing to walk that path even in the face of uncertainty, there was hope for a brighter future. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried past, and vendors called out to passers-by. It was messy, chaotic, and imperfect, but it was alive. alive with possibility, resilience, and the promise of renewal. And somewhere in the midst of it all, the man knew he had played his part. Not as a savior or a symbol, but as someone who believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to make a difference.